Let's dive into the Schleswig Wars, a fascinating yet often overlooked chapter in European history. These were two key conflicts that took place in the 19th century between Denmark and several German states. But what were they fighting over? It all came down to the Duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, territories caught in the middle of political and cultural tensions. So, what makes these wars significant? For starters, they had a lasting impact on the national boundaries and identities of Denmark and Germany. Imagine two nations locked in a tug-of-war, not just over land, but over questions of sovereignty, cultural identity, and power. The outcomes of these wars helped shape the modern borders we recognize today and played a key role in the formation of Germany as a unified state. Now, let's talk about the timeline. The First Schleswig War erupted in 1848 and lasted until 1851. This was part of a broader wave of revolutionary movement sweeping across Europe at the time. The second conflict, the Second Schleswig War, took place later in 1864. This one was shorter but much more decisive, marking a critical turning point in the region's history. These wars weren't just isolated events, they were deeply tied to the shifting dynamics of European politics in the 19th century. Keep this context in mind as we explore their causes, outcomes, and legacy in more detail. To understand the Schleswig Wars, we first need to look at the historical context of the region. Why were Schleswig and Holstein so contested? Let's break it down. First, the geographical location. These duchies sat between Denmark and Germany, right on the border of two major cultural and political spheres. Schleswig and Holstein were strategically positioned, making them a focal point of competing interests between these neighboring powers. This central location was both a blessing and a curse. It made them vital but also vulnerable to conflict. Next, the cultural composition of the region added fuel to the fire. The populations in Schleswig and Holstein were a mix of Danish and German-speaking communities. Imagine living in a region where national identities overlapped and often clashed. This cultural divide led to tensions over questions like, should these duchies align with Denmark or the German Confederation? People on both sides felt strongly about their national allegiances, creating deep-seated friction. Finally, let's talk about political importance. This wasn't just about culture, it was about strategy. Controlling Schleswig and Holstein meant controlling access to the Baltic Sea, a vital trade and military route. Additionally, the duchies acted as a buffer zone between Denmark and the German states. Whoever controlled these lands held significant influence in the region's power dynamics. In short, Schleswig and Holstein weren't just pieces of land, they were crossroads of culture, politics, and strategy. These factors created the perfect storm for conflict. Now that we've set the stage, let's move on to how these tensions escalated into war. Now, let's dig into the causes of the First Schleswig War and uncover what set this conflict in motion. It wasn't a simple dispute. This war was fueled by three major forces: nationalism, revolution, and political discord. First up, nationalism. Denmark wanted to fully integrate Schleswig into its kingdom, but this clashed directly with the rise of German nationalism in the region. The German-speaking population in Schleswig and Holstein strongly identified with the growing sense of German unity, while Denmark sought to strengthen its own national identity by bringing Schleswig under tighter control. These conflicting visions created a deep divide. Next, the Revolution of 1848 added fuel to the fire. This was a period when revolutions were sweeping across Europe. People everywhere were demanding autonomy, democracy, and national unity. For Schleswig and Holstein, this revolutionary wave amplified calls for self-determination and resistance against Denmark's attempts to consolidate control. The revolutionary spirit gave both sides the momentum and the justification to push their agendas more aggressively. Lastly, political discord played a crucial role. The governance of Schleswig and Holstein was a long-standing point of contention. These duchies were technically under the Danish crown but operated with a degree of independence, especially Holstein, which was part of the German Confederation. Denmark's efforts to assert greater control over the duchies led to a backlash, with many in Holstein and parts of Schleswig opposing Danish rule altogether. This created a political crisis that was impossible to ignore. So, when you combine these three factors, competing national identities, the revolutionary fervor of 1848, and unresolved governance issues, you get the perfect storm for conflict. It's no wonder the First Schleswig War broke out. Now, let's move on to what happened when these tensions finally erupted. Let's explore the major events of the First Schleswig War, from decisive battles to key political turning points. This conflict, lasting from 1848 to 1851, was filled with moments that shaped its outcome. First, we have the Battle of Bov in 1848. This was one of the earliest confrontations of the war, and it ended in a Danish victory over German forces. This victory was significant because it allowed Denmark to solidify early control in the conflict. It boosted Danish morale and showed that they were prepared to defend their claim to Schleswig. But the tides quickly turned with the proclamation of Schleswig-Holstein independence. The German Confederation declared the Duchies independent of Denmark, escalating tensions dramatically. This wasn't just a military escalation, it was a political one too. The proclamation brought in greater German support, turning what was initially a localized conflict into a broader struggle involving the German Confederation. Then came the Armistice of Marmont, also in 1848. This was a temporary ceasefire brokered by European powers who wanted to prevent the war from spiraling out of control. While it paused the fighting, it didn't resolve the underlying tensions. The armistice served as a reminder of how this conflict was part of a much larger European political landscape, with outside powers stepping in to manage the situation. Each of these events marked a turning point in the war, shifting the balance of power and heightening the stakes. They also reflected how both military actions and political moves were deeply intertwined in this conflict. Next, we'll look at how the war unfolded from here. After years of conflict, the First Schleswig War came to an end in 1851, but the outcomes were far from straightforward. Let's take a closer look at the lasting impacts and implications of this war. First, the status quo was restored. The Treaty of London in 1852 officially reinstated Danish control over Schleswig and Holstein, but it came with a catch: it acknowledged German interests in the region. This meant that while Denmark had regained authority, the underlying tensions were far from resolved. The treaty was more of a temporary bandage than a long-term solution. This leads to the next point. Tensions persisted. The war might have ended, but the nationalistic aspirations of both the Danish and German populations in Schleswig and Holstein didn't go away. Both sides still felt strongly about their claims to the region, and the unresolved cultural and political disputes continued to simmer beneath the surface. In many ways, the First Schleswig War was just the beginning of a much larger struggle. Finally, let's talk about European diplomacy. This conflict wasn't just a local issue, it showcased the involvement of major powers like Britain and Russia in regional disputes. These nations stepped in to mediate and prevent further escalation, reflecting the interconnected nature of European politics at the time. The war demonstrated how small-scale conflicts could draw in the great powers, setting the stage for future interventions. In summary, while the First Schleswig War temporarily ended with a restored status quo, it left behind unresolved tensions and underscored the growing importance of European diplomacy. These outcomes paved the way for further conflict, as we'll see later in the Second Schleswig War. By 1864, tensions in Schleswig and Holstein boiled over again, leading to the Second Schleswig War. But what caused this new conflict? Let's break it down into three key factors: Danish nationalism, the German Federation's response, and strategic rivalries in Europe. First, Danish nationalism played a major role. Despite the Treaty of London in 1852, which had restored the status quo, Denmark wasn't content. The Danish government sought to fully incorporate Schleswig into its kingdom, ignoring the treaty and the delicate balance it was meant to uphold. This move was seen as a direct challenge to the agreements made after the First Schleswig War and reignited tensions with the German Confederation. Second, the German Federation's response escalated the conflict. Prussia and Austria, two leading powers within the German Confederation, strongly opposed Denmark's attempts to maintain control over Schleswig and Holstein. They saw Denmark's actions as a violation of the Duchy's semi-independent status and a threat to German interests in the region. This opposition quickly turned into a military confrontation. Lastly, strategic rivalries added another layer of complexity. Prussia and Austria weren't just protecting German interests, they were also competing with each other for dominance in Northern Europe. This war gave both nations an opportunity to assert their influence and strengthen their positions within the German Confederation and beyond. In many ways, the conflict over Schleswig-Holstein became a stage for larger power struggles between European nations. These three factors, nationalism, political opposition, and strategic ambitions, set the stage for a war that would reshape the region and have far-reaching consequences for Europe. Let's move forward and explore how this conflict unfolded. Voiceover script. Let's explore the major events of the Second Schleswig War in 1864, a conflict defined by decisive battles, strategic alliances, and innovation in military tactics. First, the Battle of Dybbøl in April 1864 was a turning point. Prussia achieved a decisive victory over Danish forces, showcasing its military innovation. The Prussian army's use of advanced artillery and coordinated tactics overwhelmed Danish defenses. This battle wasn't just a military success, it demonstrated the growing technological and strategic edge of Prussia in European warfare. While Denmark faced significant defeats on land, it turned to the sea with its naval engagements. Despite losing ground on the battlefield, the Danish navy proved to be a formidable force. Denmark leveraged its naval power to disrupt Prussian operations and protect its coastline, keeping some degree of resistance alive even as the war tilted in Prussia's favor. Finally, the Austro-Prussian alliance played a key role in the conflict. Prussia and Austria coordinated a two-pronged assault on Danish positions, combining their military strength to overwhelm Denmark. This collaboration between two of the most powerful German-speaking states not only ensured victory but also highlighted their shared interest in curbing Danish influence in Schleswig and Holstein. These events, Prussia's dominance at Dybbøl, Denmark's naval efforts, and the Austro-Prussian alliance, defined the Second Schleswig War. They signaled the end of Denmark's control over the contested duchies and marked the rise of Prussia as a dominant power in northern Europe. Let's move on to the war's outcomes and lasting impact. The Second Schleswig War came to an end in 1864, and its outcomes were monumental for the region. Let's break down what this conflict meant for the major players and Europe as a whole. First, the Treaty of Vienna in 1864 formalized the end of Danish sovereignty over Schleswig and Holstein. These duchies were ceded to Austria and Prussia, effectively removing Denmark from any control in the region. This treaty marked the end of an era for Denmark, as it lost not only significant territory but also much of its influence in European politics. Next, we see the rise of Prussia. The victory in this war solidified Prussia's position as a dominant power in German affairs. Prussia's military strength, strategic alliances, and growing influence over the German Confederation set the stage for its eventual unification of Germany just a few years later. This war was a stepping stone for Prussia to assert its leadership in northern Europe. Finally, the impact on Denmark was profound. The loss of Schleswig and Holstein dealt a heavy blow to Danish national pride and military strength. Denmark emerged from the war diminished, both territorially and in terms of its standing on the international stage. For the Danes, this defeat was a humbling moment that marked the end of their ambitions as a major power. In short, the Second Schleswig War was a pivotal moment in European history. It reshaped borders, redefined power dynamics, and paved the way for larger conflicts and unifications in the years to come. The ripple effects of this war would be felt long after 1864. The Second Schleswig War didn't just change the region, it had a significant geopolitical impact across Europe and beyond. Let's take a look at the broader repercussions of this conflict. First, the war paved the way for German unification. Prussia's victory showcased its growing military and political dominance, positioning it as the leader of the German Confederation. This triumph was a key step toward unifying Germany under Prussian leadership, a process that would culminate in the creation of the German Empire in 1871. Next, there was a clear shift in power dynamics. Denmark's defeat and diminished role highlighted the rise of larger, more powerful nation-states in Europe. It signaled a changing era, where smaller powers struggled to maintain influence in the face of growing empires like Prussia and Austria. Finally, the war became a precursor to the Austro-Prussian War. While Prussia and Austria had worked together to defeat Denmark, tensions over the administration of Schleswig and Holstein quickly escalated. Their rivalry over control of the region would soon erupt into another conflict, further reshaping the European political landscape. In summary, the Second Schleswig War was more than just a territorial dispute. It accelerated the unification of Germany, shifted the balance of power in Europe, and set the stage for future conflicts between the continent's major players. Its effects would ripple through European history for years to come. The Schleswig Wars left a lasting legacy, influencing not just the nations involved but also the broader historical and cultural landscape of Europe. Let's break down their significance. First, the impact on national identities. These wars deeply shaped Danish and German national pride. For Denmark, the loss of Schleswig and Holstein was a blow to its sense of sovereignty and territorial aspirations. For Germany, the wars reinforced the idea of unification and a shared national identity, further solidifying the role of Prussia as a unifying force. These conflicts were pivotal in defining how both nations viewed themselves and their place in Europe. Next, the wars provided inspiration for military strategy. The use of advanced artillery and coordinated joint alliances by Prussia highlighted the importance of modern military tactics. These innovations set a new standard for European warfare, influencing future conflicts. The Schleswig Wars weren't just battles, they were blueprints for how wars could be fought more strategically and effectively. Finally, the wars are remembered through memorials and commemorations. Across Denmark and Germany, monuments and cultural remembrances keep the memory of these conflicts alive. They serve as reminders of the sacrifices made and the lasting impact of these wars on national history. In summary, the Schleswig Wars were more than territorial disputes. They shaped identities, inspired military advancements, and left a cultural imprint that continues to resonate. These legacies remind us why history matters. It shapes the world we live in today. Even today, the Schleswig Wars continue to be a topic of study and reflection. Modern interpretations reveal how these conflicts still resonate in historical scholarship, international relations, and cultural preservation. Let's break it down. First, there is ongoing historiographical debate. Scholars continue to examine the role of nationalism and diplomacy in the wars. Was this primarily a clash of cultures or a struggle for power? Were the outcomes inevitable, or could diplomacy have prevented the conflicts? These questions keep the Schleswig Wars relevant in academic discussions about 19th-century Europe. Next, there's the contemporary relevance of these wars. They offer valuable lessons on how regional conflicts can escalate and the importance of multinational cooperation in resolving disputes. The Schleswig Wars remind us that disputes over borders, identities, and alliances can have ripple effects far beyond the regions directly involved, lessons that are still applicable to modern conflicts around the world. Finally, there are significant preservation efforts. Archives, museums, and cultural institutions continue to document and interpret the Schleswig Wars, ensuring that future generations can learn from this critical period in European history. These efforts help us remember not only the events themselves, but also the human experiences and consequences of war. In essence, the Schleswig Wars remain a vital part of historical study and reflection. They remind us of the complexities of nationalism, the challenges of diplomacy, and the importance of preserving the past to inform the future. As we wrap up, let's reflect on the key lessons from the Schleswig Wars and what they teach us about history, politics, and identity. First, these conflicts highlight the complexity of nationalism. The Schleswig Wars illustrate how difficult it can be to balance national identity with regional stability. Competing visions of belonging, Danish or German, turned a border dispute into a decades-long struggle that reshaped the region. Second, the wars played a major role in the evolution of European politics. They foreshadowed larger power shifts, including the unification of Germany under Prussian leadership. The ripple effects of these wars extended far beyond the borders of Schleswig and Holstein, influencing the political landscape of Europe as a whole. Finally, the enduring legacy of the Schleswig Wars reminds us of the power of memory. These conflicts continue to shape cultural and historical discourse, from commemorations and monuments to ongoing scholarly debates. They serve as a reminder that the past doesn't just inform the present, it actively shapes how we see the world. And that's the story of the Schleswig Wars, a tale of nationalism, diplomacy, and transformation that echoes across history. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Your support helps us bring these fascinating stories to life. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.